Typically, through a normal real estate transaction, we have an opportunity to make objections. Did you know there's a right way and a wrong way to do that? To hear our thoughts and more, stay tuned to this episode of The Den. The Den, powered by the Lyons Group, a show dedicated to exploring hot topics in real estate, local happenings, and industry trends. We're a small team of professionals approaching $400 million in sales and nearly 2,000 local transactions. You're listening to time-tested experts and industry leaders. Here's a refreshing look at real estate happenings and more. Welcome to The Den. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Den. Today, we're going to be talking about objections. In a normal transaction, you have an opportunity to make objections to the condition of the property. We're going to talk about maybe structuring that the right way, putting some thought into that. But before we get into that topic, let me introduce my friends, my partners, my co-hosts, the fellow members of the Lyons Group. To my left, Paul Hammy the Rockberry. Aspen the Ninja Groen is not with us today. She's on a beach. And we got the boss, Shannon Martinez. And my name is Ben. Object Lyons. That's all I hear is objections in my life. Is that, that's probably normal, right? Or am I just...
Something to do with you.
Yes, right. There's a trend there. Well, thank you for that clarification, Paul Berry.
Anytime.
Yeah, I know you're there for me. He's a great wingman, by the way. Anyways, let's get into it. The objection phase. So typically in a normal real estate transaction, you have an opportunity as a buyer to make objections to certain provisions within the contract. Typically that falls under the condition of the property, but there are other opportunities to make objections. Shannon, maybe I'll kick it off with you today. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of the contingencies and where you can make objections throughout a traditional real estate transaction. We're talking residential here.
Obviously, the condition of the home. So when you have your home inspection, you would have a period of time, if you are unhappy with anything on the property, to make some objections and ask the seller to remediate those issues for you. You also have some leeway when it comes to your mortgage. You may have a pre-qualification, but maybe it just doesn't work for you. Yeah. I should say. I'm trying to think of what else.
You have insurance.
Yeah. Insurance. And you consider, you may apply for insurance and find out maybe that home had a fire a couple years back and the insurance is going to be a little bit higher than you expected, or it's in a flood zone and you weren't expecting that. And now it's just a little bit out of reach on what you think you can afford. You've got time to cancel the contract or ask the seller to remediate anything that may be standing in the way or that may be causing those issues that make it harder for you to purchase.
Yeah. So within the contract, we typically, now I wouldn't say all the time, but we typically build in the opportunity to make objections in those particular things. So when you're talking about the condition of the property or the potential of financing, let's say you started off at a 5.5% interest rate and the rates go through the roof. All of a sudden it's 6.5%, and you have a financing contingency in there that allows you to say, my payment has gone up to a point where it's not affordable for me anymore. So there's opportunities to make objections to the conditions outside of the property, right? So there is a whole playing field with a bunch of rules that are established. But Paul, I'm going to jump right to you. Is there a right way and a wrong way to make objections? And how do you approach that with your buyers?
Everybody does it a different way. I've done it different ways over my career. I always say, and I've said this on numerous podcasts, when buyers go into a house, expect them to do nothing for you. If you're buying the house and saying, I'll only buy this if they fix that, then it's going to terminate, because if they say no, you're going to terminate anyway. So I always advise them against that, or against even making the offer. I will say I've changed over the years. I think newer realtors put as much as they can in there, and they think they're doing their buyer a service and saying, we need this in mint condition before we move forward. Nowadays, with deals falling apart left and right, I go, what's your top three? What can we get? So it's like, don't give them a 20-point list. Just say, give me your big ones. Give me your deal breakers. And I try to talk with the buyers like that. And they say, okay, here are my deal breakers. If we don't fix this, it's probably not going to work out. And then what I do is, before I send it over to the seller, I'll give them or give their realtor a call and say, here's what we're looking at. Are any of these in conflict with the conversations you've had with your seller. Try to stave off any of the stress or anger or anything like that that can come up from these objections before they're presented to the other side.
Yeah. And that's a wonderful point. You have communication with your buyer about expectations. You're prepping the listing realtor in the situation about potential conflicts with their conversation with the seller. I mean, one of the things may be, the seller's like, I am not touching my roof. My roof is just fine. And then you're coming in and asking for repairs to be done on a roof. You may want to let your buyer know that before you officially submit the objections. But how much thought do you put into the objections, Shannon, when you make those? I mean, I've seen objections come through, and like you said, Paul, there's 20 points, and they just copy paste and slap it in there. Do you put a lot of thought into your objections, how you word it, how you put them together, how you approach it?
I feel like I do. I feel like I'm really thoughtful with them. I think that so many different ways to look at this. We always want the buyer to feel like you do have the right to ask for anything that you're not comfortable with. So we don't want people to feel like they can't ask for things. On the opposite side, we want you to understand what the process is. And the process is, to remediate issues that are really a problem with the house, not just say, I'm spending an awful lot of money, so I want everything perfect. That's not going to happen. And from a seller standpoint, just understand your house isn't perfect. There are going to be some things on there, and there are going to be some things that concern your buyer. So I think if everybody's prepped properly, that's the first thing, make sure everybody understands that, and then go in and find out what are the really big issues, because there are some issues that really are fearful to a buyer, even if a buyer is buying a house as is, and they expect that they're going to be renovating the house, but then you run into something that's, just completely unacceptable. You need to be able to ask, because probably anybody's going to need that remediated before they're going to be able to purchase it. And that seller probably needs to understand that and understand that they're going to need to do that. So there's a lot that goes into it. And there's a lot that goes into how you want things done. Maybe the house is only 10 years service life left on that roof, and the buyer is saying, I'm not going to replace it in 10 years. I just want a new one. Well, that might be a little unreasonable. If someone has 5 offers on the house, you were the one that got accepted. They've got backup offers. They don't really need to do that. Nobody else is going to do that. I think that you just have to take it case by case and be thoughtful about the situation. There's always a place where both parties can be happy if you just have good open communication between both sides.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I would agree in the sense that, every situation is different, right? And you really have to put some thought into whether this is a reasonable ask and go maybe to health and safety first and foremost, right? Is there a health or safety issue that we're addressing here? Because most of the time, if that's the case, that seller's going to have to, this is always my argument to my sellers, like, look, you're going to have to slay this dragon right now, or you're going to have to do it with the next buyer, the buyer after that. So, why wouldn't we just handle this right now? Because it's going to keep recurring or coming to the front line until you deal with it. So that's an important angle to take. Do you put a lot of thought into how you approach the other realtor with the objections, or how you word them specifically? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I try to. I try not to just send over my list of wants on the objection form. And I would like people to do this to me, to, give a call with a little bit of perspective and, let them know, maybe there was an awful lot of things on there, but these were really the important things to this buyer. This was really their big stuff, and maybe what their expectations are. Maybe it doesn't really, need a brand new roof. Maybe it just needs a little bit of, maintenance, but get a professional over there to evaluate it, get a second opinion. And as long as the seller is willing to do any of those things that are, requested by a licensed professional, then they would feel more comfortable with it. So I do like to talk to the other side. I like that better than just sending over a list of demands, basically, because that's how it feels. I think a lot of times that's how it feels to a seller when they just receive a list of, I want XYZ.
Yeah.
But it's backed up with a report, and it's backed up with a couple of options that the buyer's willing to take. Then it becomes a little more palatable for them to deal with.
Yeah, I agree with that. I take the time actually to go through and parse out the report and make sure that it's very fluid, that the other realtor, when they get it, they can go, okay, this item, this picture, this request. It's very, it's very standardized from my end, because I really, really do not like when I get a sloppy mess of objections and I'm muddling through it as the listing agent. Like, what are they really asking for here? And what are the concerns? Because a lot of people do that. We have a lot of great realtors that put a lot of time and thought into that, but there's always room for an improvement. And I can't say that I'm perfect with it, but I certainly am intentional with my requests. And I have those conversations with my client, but also I set the expectation with the other realtor, whether I'm working with buyer or seller, where we need to go with these things. Paul, talk to us like on the sense of what type of liability could you have if you don't word your objections right, in the sense of, hey, we got a roof problem, fix it. Have someone fix it, seller to fix, right? What would be the problem with something like that? Or there's an electrical issue, seller to remedy prior to closing. What do you see would be an issue there, and what should buyers be aware of? And sellers too. Let's talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah. So, these contracts don't end at closing. That's one thing. So if you do something that you weren't supposed to, you could have some liability once, even after closing. But the recommendation I always give is, if it's something that's usually done by somebody that's licensed, get somebody that's licensed. Put in there, I want a licensed person to do this. And then you get the receipt. When we get these things done, we ask for the invoice back. We make sure that everything that was done properly. If you have the homeowner do it, and then all of a sudden the house burns down because of an electrical issue that the homeowner did, you can't go back to that electrician and say, hey, now your insurance is covering it. Nope, it's a homeowner fix that caused an issue. So, and we see that all the time. And, we even have some policies. Some offices have policies that say you can only have licensed people go in there. You can only have, if you're going to do a home inspection, it's only valid if you use a licensed home inspector, And then there's certain things like flooring you can do yourself, but plumbing, electrical, roofing, those are the big things. If you were to ask your insurance agent, I always say this: if you're going to go and call your insurance agent and say, the roof needed repaired, I did it myself, do you think they say, all right, good job?
Thumbs up, yeah.
No, they're going to say, no, get a pro out there. What are you doing?
Yeah.
It's one of those things. It should be common sense, but people are always trying to save money and get these things done themselves. Or I know somebody that can do it. We always say there's handyman stuff, just clean up, painting, kind of the easy stuff. And then there's stuff you get the pros out for.
Yeah. And I think you nailed that in the sense that when you ask for a repair from a buyer standpoint, you're asking for a licensed contractor to do these things, unless it's like you said, painting some trim. We just had one that had some tree branches that were rubbing up against the roof. Sure, you can hire somebody that maybe isn't a licensed contractor to go trim back some branches and some things like that. But you've got to be really careful to delineate between those two. I've had sellers before where they said, look, they're asking for these electrical repairs to be done. And he's like, well, I've done all the electrical on the house over the years. I'll just take care of it. I'm like, do you really want to do that? Because now all of a sudden, if, like you said, there's an issue with electrical, a safety issue, someone gets hurt, the house burns down, the first person they're coming back to is whoever did the electrical work on that property. And yeah, you may have done it over the years, a few outlets here and there, but we're talking about right now today, and these are the things that have been identified as issues. Take the time to hire a licensed contractor to do it, because no longer are you culpable or liable for that. It's the contractor that does it, who rightfully so, if they screwed it up, should be the one that, has to face the fire a bit. Not to throw people under the bus, but that's just the reality of how it works, right? I wouldn't step into an attorney's lane and start giving legal advice, because that is not my lane. And I can take on liability as a realtor by doing that. And I think we're all aware of that. So I think it's really important for that part of it to be on the front line. Like, is this a request repair that should involve a licensed contractor? And when you start getting into it, it should be pretty black and white pretty quick. So oftentimes too, I think you were talking about this, Paul, and this parlays into, the market. right? Right now, the market is okay. Maybe get your top 3 instead of a full list. A few years ago, it was like, you can't object to anything. There's 7 backup offers and you're going to take this as is. So the most important thing is you need to understand what you're buying versus trying to, get some repairs done. But, for me, when I submit these objections and try to do it in a very, easy way for the other realtor, do you think that really helps with the negotiation, or is ultimately it's just kind of the same? You're going to get the same result regardless. What are your thoughts on that, Shannon?
Well, something I was going to add to this is, I think something important to think about is being clear on what you want too, because it's just as important, like you mentioned. You will have people that say, the roof needs some attention, and that might be what you get on your objection. So then it's just in our, it's in our court to figure out what it is that needs attention or what you want done, because what we decide might be good is not good for your buyer. It's very important to be extremely intentional and pointed on what it is you are asking for. I've had numerous times where you'll have something, maybe we've all seen this. Somebody runs maybe an extension cord through the attic and drops a light down in a closet or something like that. It happens all the time. Yeah. And then it's called out by the inspector. It's not legal. It's not up to code. And, the buyer says, fix that. There's an electrical issue. So the seller says, okay, no problem. I'm going to go unplug it and take it out of there. And the buyer says, hey, now I don't have a light in the closet. Yeah, I fixed it. Yeah. So be intentional. What is it that you want? Do you want them to get an electrician and install a light in there for you? If that's what you wanted, you should have said that. Don't leave it to the other side to decide how that's going to be fixed. So I think that's one of the problems we run into with objections, is not being extremely clear on what it is that you want. Because what the seller sees fit and the buyer sees fit can be very different. The seller's going to see fit what is the probably easiest, quickest, and cheapest to remediate the problem. And the buyer is going to see the right fix as being what's going to make them comfortable long-term in the future. And that's going to be very different.
Yeah. Seeking clarity, seeking to understand your client's, wishes and wants. Mm-hmm. Very important. I mean, I've seen the full spectrum where some realtors hand over a blank page to their buyer and say, fill out what you want. Right. And then other times I've seen realtors say, oh, I'll just go through it and pick the things I think are the most important.
I'll let you know what needs to be done.
Yeah.
That's not up to us.
Which side of the spectrum do you land on there, Shannon?
Well, I think both are wrong. I think it's important to sit with your buyer and find out what the concerns are. Look it over with them and point out things that you might see as a red flag that they didn't see, and then point out what that's important, even though it may be very insignificant to you, because you're not the one buying the house. We're not the ones buying the house and going to live with the house. So we need to make sure the buyer's the one that's happy with what they're asking for. I think there's not really a right answer. You have some people that I've had people want to buy a house and they say they just don't care about some of those issues. They've been living it with that way. It's not a big deal. It won't be a problem for me. And I'm thinking, wow, that could be a huge issue in your future. But if it's not a problem to them, that's up to them. All I can do is educate them and let them make a choice. On the flip side, you've seen the same thing too. People really walking away from a deal over things that you're going, that's not a big deal. You're just not ready to be a homeowner. Yeah. Like you're clearly not, you're missing the point of this whole process here. That's not what this is for. So, everybody's different, and each individual buyer is going to determine what their comfort level with buying is and what they're willing to accept on a house. I think it's just up to us to guide them through the process, give them as much education as we can, and try to advocate for what it is that they want as best we can, and try to get that for them.
Is that the same process as you go through, Paul? I mean, you sit down with the client, you talk through the things, you talk about the health and safety issues, you allow them to, make the points that they want to make, or the asks or the requests, then you reframe it for them. Is that how you kind of go through it?
Yes.
Okay. Great answer.
No, so when I go through a report with them, I'll usually go through it on my own. I don't like to have anybody go through something with me that is the first time I'm seeing it too. Because I might be saying, oh, this doesn't look that bad. And they were going, what are you talking about? This is the worst thing ever. So always I let them go first. What did you think? I've obviously looked at it already. What do you think? They say, usually if they're buying the house, they either know that it's a piece of junk, or they go, I was surprised by a couple of things, but overall it looks pretty good. And then you come up with a couple of things, and I like to use the word deal breaker. If we get to the point where we're going over the inspection report, I go, what are your deal breakers? What if this is not addressed? And I also talk about appraisals issues. Like this will come up on the appraisal.
Yeah, great point.
So I talk about those things too. And once we have all of that, what are their big ones? What are the deal breakers? What do I see as appraisal issues? And then we start talking about it. And then we kind of come up with a strategy on how to ask the seller, because there's a lot of things that we've already negotiated: price, concessions, closing costs, all of that kind of stuff, closing date, home warranties, those types of things that, we have all of that we can use as our levers. And then we have all of these now that we are saying, okay, we're going to eat into some of this stuff now. So I go through all of their options and I say, look, you could give them the whole list and tick them off and get none. That's something that could happen. They could say yes. We've had those sellers that, no matter what they give me, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to sell this house. Even before we've agreed or signed the thing, we've all had those sellers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the strategy is how we present that. And I like to say, okay, you only got to call out two people, an electrician and a plumber. Mm-hmm. And that's how I put it, because if you give a paper that looks like this, that has all of these things on it, they're going to go, oh my God, I'm going to wait to the next guy.
Yep.
I'll just go back to market. But if you put it down and say, we only need to call two people out, and it's really small stuff. That's the conversation you have with the other realtor. I said, it might look long. It's really two guys that are going to come out an hour each. It's not a big deal, but there's a lot of stuff.
So you frame perspective quite a bit. I mean, I love that.
Yeah. Because really, we've talked about this before. All of this is emotional. So it's that EQ stuff that we've talked about before in another podcast. You got to say, I know you want all of this stuff perfect. They want to not do anything. How do we get to where you're both happy? And I think one of the things is to make sure that their expectations are managed quite well and say, we're not going to get all of it. If you put 8 things on there, we're going to get 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we always say split the difference, right? That's a huge one.
Sure.
Split the difference. Well, you'll get 4 of these. So put the ones you want and the ones that you can handle. The other thing that I always talk about too is say, if you think this is fine for you to move into now, think about when you're selling it down the road. This is going to be an issue for the next person. Mm-hmm. Even if it's 10 years from now, this still has to be addressed either by you or by them now. It's easier to negotiate it now.
Yeah, that's exactly what Shannon was saying. But I love that approach. Both of your approaches is like, look, these things can be an issue. We're seeing it, right? We have a different lens. We're seeing the problems because we're coming up to a problem. When we list a property, like, oh, that was a problem. You didn't address that 5 years ago when you bought the home, or 10 years ago. Well, now it's a big problem for you, and we got to address it now. So we see those. They may not be thinking along those lines, but it's important that we bring it to their attention. So I even take it a step further where we go through, like you said, I sit down and do my own research on the report, allow them to do theirs. Then we schedule a time to sit down and talk through it, ask them what their problems are, what are their big issues. Then we go through, and if I see something that clearly I feel is a big problem, I bring it to their attention. It may not just be one thing, it may be 2 or 3 things. They may very quickly say, I'm not worried about it. It's not a big deal. Okay, I just want to make sure I brought this to your attention. At that point, we formulate the objections. I send it to them to review first. Before they sign anything, they're reviewing it. Do you want to make any changes? And here's some rationale behind why I put this. And usually that's pretty effective. So then we're all on the same page before we call the other realtor and then submit those objections. Seems like it takes a lot of work to do that. A lot of people just say, oh, just write it down and submit it, right? But there's a lot more to the objections, a lot. Us right into the speed round. I asked this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to ask it again. And Paul, I'm going to start with you. Is there really a difference in how you structure your objections thoughtfully, or ultimately is it the same result in the end?
No, it's definitely presentation is key. If I have time to give one story.
Yeah, please.
I had an experienced realtor, and I had been in their vicinity when they were setting this up, and I overheard a conversation, and I asked them as soon as they were done with that call, I go, did I just hear you right? You're just going to take the repair list off of the inspection report and just send that over? I go, is that what you always do? And they say, yes. And I go, And is it a struggle? Do you hate objections because it's always a struggle? Yes. I go, okay, let me talk to you a second. So I think how it's presented is extremely important, because I think if you're doing it the other way, you're doing a disservice to your client, because you're putting the sellers on defense and you are being aggressive to the sellers. And I would say 9 times out of 10, if you do something like that, you're not getting what you want.
Yeah. And add to that, you're also giving the seller kind of carte blanche how to handle it. If you're not very specific about, hey, there's a plumbing leak. We want you to replace the flex line that shouldn't be there with some PVC versus, hey, just duct tape the plumbing. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a big difference, right? So you're giving the seller carte blanche versus being more specific.
Well, sure. And then your deal breaker is the roof replacement. And they go, we've fixed 30 of your other stuff.
Yeah.
You do the roof.
You do the roof. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen that too.
Great answer. Shannon, same question to you. Is there really a difference if you structure your objections thoughtfully, or ultimately is the same result in the end?
No, it makes a huge difference. I think you need to be specific. I think you need to be thoughtful about what you're asking for. And I think that it helps when your broker reaches out to the other side with a little bit of background or some information for it. I think that all lends to you actually getting what you want out of it.
I think that's a great point. And I agree both wholeheartedly. I think put thought into your objections, how you structure it, make sure you gain clarity from your client, and then also prep the other realtor when you call and you frame it in the right way. Paul, I love the fact that in this, I do the same thing is, I take all the plumbing items and I put them under one section, all the electrical versus like you're scanning through and there's a plumbing, an electrical, plumbing.
And you miss one.
Yeah. And you're like, what? So then you're having to do that work. It makes it a very tedious process on the other side. And we want it to be smooth, right? Yeah. We want this to be a smooth transaction and not rock the boat. So,
because we got to get that form and then give it to an emotional seller.
Yeah.
So if it looks like garbage.
Yeah. I rarely send something off without being able to have a conversation or a text message or something, prepping them. They don't view it in the wrong light or in a light that is not productive for them. So great discussion, man, that flew by. And I think it's really important for you as a client, as you're moving through the process of purchasing a property or selling a property, to understand the thoughts behind objections that may take you off course or keep you on course to a successful closing. So hopefully this podcast give you some insight and perspective to that part of the process. If you like our content, go to sjcbroker.com and get on our newsletter list. We have a fantastic newsletter that we send out weekly. We have all kinds of great information in it. Like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're pumping out great content all the time. Of course, Facebook, we do have great content going out there. We've got all kinds of channels, great information to help our clients, our buyers and sellers, whether you're residential, commercial, buying or selling. We can give you an advantage in today's market. Go to sjcbroker.com. Schedule a consultation with any one of us here at the Lyons Group. We'd love to sit down with you, have a conversation about your wants, needs, and strategies in today's market and give you that competitive advantage. So thank you for listening to this episode of The Den. Until next time, we'll see you then. Thank you for listening to The Den, powered by the Lyons Group. Hit the subscribe button to keep informed on real estate happenings. If you'd like to learn more about the Lyons Group, visit sjcbroker.com. Complex markets require complex strategies. The Lyons Group can give you a true advantage in any market. Whether you're buying or selling, residential or commercial, contact us directly at sjcbroker.com. We're time-tested experts with a client-first approach, and we'll see you next time in The Den.